Welcome, everybody. My name is Erin Toomey. I'm a partner at the law firm of Foley & Lardner, and I'm located here in our Detroit office. Today we are, again, like we did last year, live streaming this seminar via webinar. So I ask for everybody's patience as I give maybe separate instructions to those in person as well as to those who are joining us by phone today. For those who are in person, during the last half hour or so, you have seen a presentation being run through all these fantastic screens about Foley. So I won't spend too much time telling you what Foley & Lardner is. For those of you on the webinar, Foley & Lardner is a law firm with nearly 900 lawyers and about 22 offices around the country. We have several folks from our Washington, D.C. office here today, as well as folks in our audience from our Detroit office. If you want to learn more about Foley, you can go to our website, www.foley.com, and learn about all the great things that we do other than just our government contracts practice. So the structure of the program today is we are going to have 4 different presenters. You don't have to listen to me talk a lot this year, and 5 different topics. The way we work it is that we ask that you hold your questions until after when we have some breaks. So we're going to do 3 presentations and then do a Q&A and then do about a 15-minute break. And then we'll go to do 2 more presentations, do another Q&A, and then there's our networking lunch for those who are in person. For those on the phone, I did not order you lunch, and I'm sorry about that. For those who are on the phone, you can still participate in our Q&A. There is a Q&A widget on the left side of your screen, and feel free to go ahead and insert whatever question you may have. We have Brandy Gill here from our San Diego office, traveled the farthest to be with us today, who is going to be manning the webinar, and she'll be able to ask those questions during the Q&A period. It's always difficult for us to try to determine the topics for the seminars. We have a wide variety of attendees, some who have been doing this type of work for 20 years or more, some who've just hearing about government contracts for the first time. So some stuff might be a little bit repetitive or elementary, and other things might be a little bit complex, but we try to make sure we don't lose anyone in the process, but are still giving you information that's novel for those who have been in the industry for a long time. For those who want continuing legal education CLE credit, there is a form out front by Donna for you to fill out. Make sure that you do so. For those on the webinar, you will, throughout the presentation, there will be time frames where we read out some codes. You will then need to enter the code, and we'll give you some information on how to do that in a designated box. If you miss a code, you will not get your CLE credit, so listen for the code. We will read it a few times just to make sure that you get it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing our speakers in detail. Everybody has in front of them a fantastic handout that we get every year. We have not yet gone to the world of electronics for this, but we always get some feedback on that. Under tab 1, you'll see a list of our topics, and then tabs 2 through 6 are the presentations. Tab 7 is a glossary of acronyms. These are not all the acronyms in government contracts. We do not have enough paper for that, but these are the ones that are used in the presentation. So if you feel like there's an acronym and you kind of lost as to where it was defined in the presentation, this is a quick reference guide for you. And then under tab 8, we have the bios of our 4 speakers here today. Again, a good opportunity for you to read about each of us without us having to go into a lot of detail. If those in the webinar are experiencing any technical difficulties, you can email Harrison or put a message in the Q&A, and we'll try to get you help as soon as possible. To make it a good experience for those on the webinar, please make sure that we keep background noise to a minimum, so please turn off your cell phone ringers, speakers included, and make sure that if you need to take a phone call or step out or say something to your neighbor, please try to keep noise to a minimum. So, any questions before we begin? Then let's get started. So our first speaker is Anna Ross. She is from our Washington, D.C. office.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Ross. I'm an associate in our Washington, D.C. office. I thought I would start our seminar off with a discussion about some of the advantages and considerations for small business contractors. So this presentation will start with an overview of the Small Business Administration Contracting Program, We'll discuss some of the particular advantages for small business contractors, as well as the compliance considerations that apply both to small business contractors and to large business contractors that work with small businesses. And we'll end with some key takeaways. So the Small Business Administration Contracting Program is run by the SBA, the Small Business Administration, and it sets and implements some of the overall requirements for small businesses. And when we talk about a small business concern, we're referring to a business that is independently owned and operated and which is not dominant in its field of operation that's set by statute. And backing up a bit, a business concern in this context is a for-profit entity with a place of business in the United States and that operates primarily in the United States or that otherwise significantly contributes to the U.S. economy. The SBA sets size standards and other requirements for small businesses. And for a particular procurement, a small business can't exceed whatever relevant size standard applies. And there's two different types of size standards that can apply. A size standard is either the number of employees that a small business can have or the overall amount of annual receipts. And that size standard is determined by the NAICS code. So whatever relevant NAICS code applies to that business will set a threshold of either a maximum number of employees or of a maximum amount of annual receipts. So the SBA also works with other agencies to carry out the particular government contracting goals and to ensure that a certain amount of overall government contracting dollars go to small businesses. The current goal is that at least 23% of all private government contract dollars go to small businesses. And then in addition to that, there are specific goals set by statute that apply to particular types of small businesses. And the SBA also runs different mentorship and other development programs that are targeted at helping small businesses. The SBA contracting program creates several different types of categories of small businesses concerns that can be eligible for certain kinds of set-aside contracts or sole source contracts. And the SBA oversees these programs and also issues and implements requirements that apply to these programs. So the 5 types of programs we'll be discussing in more detail today are the 8A Business Development Program, the Veteran-Owned Small Businesses, ServiceDisabled Veteran-Owned Small Businesses, Women-Owned Small Businesses, and Historically Underutilized Business-Owned Small Businesses. The 8A Business Development Program is a program for minority-owned small businesses. So it's businesses that are unconditionally owned and operated by one or more socially and economically disadvantaged individuals that both demonstrate good character and demonstrate a potential for success. And the 2 stages of participation in the 8A program are the developmental stage, where the socially disadvantaged business receives assistance in the form of technical assistance, mentorship, counseling, financial assistance, procurement assistance, management assistance, and then they move to the transitional stage because the overall goal is to graduate these small businesses from the program. And businesses in this program also have the benefit of a statutory goal of the federal government to award at least 5% of all prime contracts and subcontracts to these types of businesses. Veteran-owned small businesses are small businesses that are at least 51% owned by one or more veterans. And this 51% number is sort of the magic number in this space that comes up over and over again, and for which the management and daily business operations are controlled by one or more veterans. And that's an important requirement. The veteran owner or owners can't just be the owners on paper. They really have to be intimately involved with the business. And veteran-owned small businesses, for the most part, can actually self-certify their status in SAM, the System for Award Management, with the exception of VA contracts. For those contracts, the VOSBs have to be verified through the VetBiz database. And importantly, large businesses that are using a veteran-owned small business, as such, also have to rely on the VetBiz verification when it's a VA procurement. The VA recently attempted to update some of the requirements for small businesses, veteran-owned small businesses, to obtain verified status. They tried to change and redefine certain terms. But they actually received a lot of pushback on that. There were 200 comments submitted in response to the VA's proposed rule, including one from the SBA that basically claimed the VA hadn't properly considered what the impact on small businesses would be. And so in response to that pretty negative feedback, the VA ultimately decided to withdraw the proposed rule and is sticking with the requirements as they currently stand. Service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses are a particular category of veteran-owned small businesses where the 51% owner is a service-disabled veteran. Again, the service-disabled veteran veterans have to exercise management and daily business operation control, or in the case of particular types of disability, that veteran's spouse or primary caregiver, it needs to be the one who exercises that type of management and control. Now, service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses have some additional advantages, particularly because they can be eligible for sole source and other kinds of set-aside procurement. And there's a federal goal to award at least 3% of all prime contracts and subcontracts to SDVOSBs. Women-owned small businesses are a fourth category of small business concerns, again, that are at least 51% directly and unconditionally owned, controlled by one or more women. And the woman or women also have to exercise control over the management and daily business operations. And the SBA has some additional regulatory requirements defining what that control has to look like. So a woman has to hold the highest officer position for the company. And although she doesn't have to necessarily have the technical expertise of what the company does, she does have to be able to exercise managerial or supervisory control over those that do. And in general, women-owned small businesses currently can self-certify their status as a women-owned small business. Within the women-owned small business category, there's also a subcategory of economically disadvantaged women-owned small businesses. And so these are considered women-owned small businesses that are in substantially underrepresented industries. And to be considered an economically disadvantaged women-owned small business, the woman owner or owners need to have a overall personal net worth of $750,000 or less, and her average annual income for the past 3 years has to average $350,000 or less. The Women-Owned Small Business Program recently expanded to 113 different industries about a year and a half ago. And women-owned small businesses also benefit from a federal procurement goal to award 5% of all prime contracts and subcontracts to women-owned small businesses. There have been some recent self-certification issues with women-owned small businesses. As I mentioned before, women-owned small businesses can currently self-certify their status, although there was a push in the NDAA Act of 2015 to require third-party certification of women-owned small businesses, which is obviously a heightened requirement, requiring independent verification of status of a woman-owned small business. But that hasn't actually yet been implemented, and the certification process is still under review. The last category of small businesses are HUBZone programs. And these are small businesses that are designated by the SBA as a HUBZone small business, and there's two principal requirements. The first is that the principal office has to be located in a HUBZone, and that's where the greatest concentration of employees work, the office that has the greatest number of employees working in any one office. That's considered the principal office. And then in addition to that, at least 35% of the employees have to reside within a HUBZone. And HUBZone small businesses also benefit from a federal procurement goal to award 3% of all prime contracts and subcontracts to HUBZone businesses. So there are several key advantages to being a small business contractor. One of the first is eligibility for set-aside contracts. And under what's known as the rule of two, for any acquisition over $150,000, for which there's an expectation that at least 2 small businesses will submit offers, and the contracting offer expects that he or she can make an award at fair market price, that contract has to be set aside for small businesses. There's also sole source contracts that particular types of small businesses can be eligible for. The 4 businesses that are eligible for sole source contracts are the socially disadvantaged businesses, the 8 businesses, HUBZone, ServiceDisabled, VeteranOwned small businesses, and WomenOwned small businesses. And a sole source contract is a contract that goes directly to a qualified contractor, and it's essentially outside of the competition process. But importantly, when there is a sole source or set-aside contract, the small business concern has to agree that it will perform a certain amount of the work itself, and that varies by the type of contract it is. So for a services contract, the small business has to perform at least 50% of the contract. For supplies, it's also 50%. For general construction, it's 15%. And then for special trade construction, it's 25%. And this provision is essentially to make sure that a small business doesn't pass on a set-aside or sole source contract to a large business by subcontracting all of the work out. There's been a recent development last year to this clause. The SBA regulations now provide that when you're calculating compliance with the limitation on subcontracting clause, a small business concern can actually take credit for a similarly situated entity. So if you have a women-owned small business subcontracting to another woman-owned small business, that subcontracting doesn't count as subcontracted work for purposes of complying with the rule. But there's been some confusion because although the SBA implemented these new regulations a while ago, the FAR clause hasn't yet been updated to reflect this. And so some agencies like the VA have stepped in and indicated that they will be following the new SBA regulations. But other agencies have been sticking with the current FAR clause. Luckily, that should be changing soon. There is a draft FAR rule in the works to align the 2 limitations on subcontracting requirements to make sure that the FAR reflects what the small business regulations indicate. Another important decision for set-aside contracts is the Kingdomware decision. That was a Supreme Court case that was decided last summer, in which the VA had tried to take the position that it could order off of the GA schedule without first applying the rule of 2, essentially saying that that was outside of the rule of 2's requirements. The Supreme Court disagreed and said that no, by its text, the rule of 2 is a mandatory requirement, and so it has to be applied by the VA to all contracting determinations. And so the VA can't evade the requirements of the rule of 2 by meeting its contracting goals or otherwise ordering off of the GSA schedule. So another type of advantage for small business concerns is the ability to participate in other SBA programs. One of these is the Small Business Innovation Research Program. And so it's a federal research and development program that is available to businesses with 500 or fewer employees that have innovative ideas in the technological or scientific space. There's about $5 billion in annual awards that flow through the program, although the program itself is run by different participating agencies, and some of these are listed here on the right. So the SBIR program is a 3-phase program. The first startup phase, the small business essentially demonstrates that its idea has legs. So it looks at the technical merit, the feasibility, and commercial potential of the research and development effort or idea. And there's smaller awards in this phase of the program, typically about $150,000 for a 6-month period. And then in the second expansion phase is when they grow their ideas. And there's larger awards available in this phase of the program. They're up to $1 million awards. And then finally, in the third technological support phase, the relevant agency works with the small business to help move the product from the laboratory to the marketplace. So they try to commercialize the idea. And there's not actually any specific funding for this phase. It's more in the assistance realm. And large businesses are actually also eligible to participate in this phase of the program. So a similar program is the Small Business Technology Transfer Program. It's also a 3-phase program, research and development program. Importantly for this program, in the first 2 phases, the small business is partnered with a federal research entity to help develop the research and development in a cooperative manner. Another type of SBA program is a mentoring program for small businesses. There are several different kinds that provide mentors and counselors, development centers, and other kinds of outreach. One of the biggest and most well-known is the Mentor Protege Program, which ultimately helps to pair small protege firms with a larger, more established mentor to help the protege firm successfully compete for government contracts. And this program was recently revamped. There used to be individual programs for each type of small business constituency, but last year they transformed the program into the All Small Mentor Protege Program, which is modeled after the 8A Mentor Program. And the protege firms are eligible to form a joint venture with an SBA-approved mentor. So that joint venture can qualify for certain types of set-asides. It has to be a separate entity. It also has to be primarily owned by the protege firm at least 51%. And the agreement has to specify what each party's responsibilities are going to be with respect to the joint venture. Finally, small businesses are exempt from a number of the more onerous requirements for government contractors. Notable among these are exemptions from the cost accounting standards. They're exempt from the requirement to have a small business subcontracting plan. And they're also exempt from the requirement to develop and implement a business ethics awareness and compliance program and internal control systems to help implement that. So some of the more complicated requirements that are expected of larger contractors don't apply to smaller businesses. On the other hand, there's a number of compliance considerations that are important both for smaller businesses and for large businesses that work with them. One of the most fundamental is the affiliation rules, which go to whether a business is small in the first place. So the affiliation rules require that the size of a small business concern is determined by adding, whether it's the annual receipts or the number of employees, whatever the particular type of size threshold is, for the entity itself and for all of its domestic and foreign affiliates. And so concerns and entities can be affiliates of one another in 2 principal ways, either when one entity controls or has the power to control the other, or when 2 entities are controlled or have the potential to be controlled by a third entity. And importantly, this control doesn't have to actually be exerted for affiliation to occur. It's just the potential to control is what creates affiliation. Some of the key factors to consider are common ownership, common management, where there's a newly organized concern, or where there's other types of contractual relationships that can create this control or the potential to control. And this comes up a lot, especially with private equity funds, where you have a private equity fund that owns a number of smaller entities that may be operating independently of each other and may not even be aware of what the other entities are doing because they both are controlled by the same overall entity. They are affiliated for purposes of government contracting. And equally important is that when a business is certifying its status as small, it has to consider all of these affiliation factors and make sure that its employees or whoever's responsible for making the certification is really familiar with these rules and is making an accurate certification. We've seen this come up before where a business doesn't realize it's actually a large business because they are owned by a large business, but they don't, on a day-to-day basis, they really don't have much to do with a larger business. And the person who's responsible for updating the registration and SAM just simply doesn't know that. And that can create big problems for the small business with regard to government contracting. So you want to make sure that whoever is making the representation is actually familiar with what the rules are and what the status of the business is. Another consideration for the affiliation rules are the joint venture rules. So recently, the SBA issued regulations that allow a joint venture to qualify as small for government procurement purposes if both partners to the joint venture qualify individually as small. And the applicable size standard would be dictated by the relevant NAICS code that's assigned to the solicitor. Another compliance consideration is subcontracting, and this is especially true for large contractors. In certain circumstances, specifically where there is a prime contract or a non-commercial item subcontract in excess of $700,000 that offers further subcontracting opportunities, the large business has to submit a small business subcontracting plan to the agency. So there's pretty specific requirements for the subcontracting plan. The subcontracting plan has to specify specific percentage goals. It has to indicate the total dollars that it plans to subcontract to small business concerns. It has to describe what types of supplies and services it will be subcontracting and how it's going to develop those subcontracting goals and identify potential subcontractors. It also has to provide certain assurances that the contractor is going to comply with federal requirements with regard to small business contracting. In putting together those plans, though, a large business can rely on self-certification from a small business. And there's two principal types of small business subcontracting plans. The first is a commercial plan, which applies for an entity's overall fiscal year, and it applies to all of the commercial items that that entity makes. And then there's also individual small business subcontracting plans, which are more procurement specific, and they're often tailored to meet specific goals of the procurement. And so those apply for the length of the procurement rather than an entity's fiscal year. Another thing to consider is when a small business represents itself as a small business concern, that size is established at the date of proposal with price. So it effectively locks in the size of the small business concern for the duration of the contract. So it's good over the life of the contract. There's a few important exceptions for this rule. The first is where there's a longer-term contract, a contract that's longer than 5 years. It does require the contractor to recertify its small status. Also, if the small business contractor undergoes certain triggering events, those include mergers, sales, acquisitions, or innovation, it has to recertify its status as small. And then also, if the contracting officer requests a new size certification in connection with a specific order under a multiple award contract, the contractor, again, needs to recertify its status small. One of the issues that can come up is when a contractor, a small business contractor or a contractor misrepresents its size as small. And a willful misrepresentation is when the misrepresentation is affirmative, willful, and intentional. And examples of that include submitting a bid that is classified for small business concerns. So in the act of submitting a bid, you are making a willful representation, or importantly here, if it's a misrepresentation, that you are small. Again, if you submit a bid that encourages a federal agency to classify a proposal as an award to an SCC, it's also considered a willful misrepresentation. Or if you register yourself in any federal electronic database, SAM is the big one, as being a small business concern, that's also considered a willful. You are not in fact small. And so when you willfully misrepresent your size as small, it can result in what's deemed a total loss to the government, and then can result in repayment of the entire price of the contract. So it's pretty significant consequences. And there's also the potential for liability under the Civil False Claims Act or criminal false statement liability. And misrepresentation can also come up in bid protest issues. In particular, size protests are actually routed through the SBA instead of the regular GAO bid protest. In this space, we've also seen an uptick recently in False Claims Act cases that are based on misrepresentation of a business as small. Two recent cases, both in the last month. And the first involved a contractor that submitted claims for payment under a fraudulently obtained small business set-aside contracts. And the second involved these compliance certifications. And again, both of these cases came up under the False Claims Act, which potentially signal that DOJ is going to become more active in this space and take on a stronger role in trying to combat small business fraud issues. So finally, some of the key takeaways. First is to consider how the government is doing in this space. As mentioned before, there's an overall goal of awarding 23% of all federal contract dollars to small businesses. And the federal government has actually met that goal for the fourth year in a row. It has awarded, it has met that goal, and most recently for FY 2016, it awarded over 24% of all federal contract dollars to small businesses, totaling almost $100 billion. However, in the individual categories, you'll recall that previously we walked through some of the statutory goals for the different types of small businesses. The results have been a bit more mixed. So the government has far exceeded its goals with respect to the 8A businesses. It has an overall goal of 5% and awarded nearly 10% of all prime and subcontract dollars to these businesses. Similarly, for the ServiceDisabled veteran-owned small businesses, there's a goal of 3%. The federal government exceeded that goal, awarding nearly 4% of the prime and subcontracts to these types of businesses. For women-owned small businesses, the government fell a bit short. And then for HUBZone businesses, the government fell pretty far short of its 3% goal, only reaching about 50% of that goal. So finally, some of the key considerations for both large and small businesses are, one, to know what the SBA programs offer. There are unique opportunities for small businesses, and for certain types of small businesses, there's even further opportunities, especially with respect to set-aside and sole source contracts. But at the same time, there can be a lot of tricky issues that come up with small businesses. And one of them is determining whether a business qualifies as small in the first place. So we mentioned control is a central issue. And the affiliation rules matter a lot. It's really important to be familiar with what those rules are when you're looking at whether or not a business is truly small. And that's important because misrepresentation can lead to significant liability in addition to both contractual and bid protest consequences. And if you do find yourself in a situation where there has been a misrepresentation, of size status, it's important to consider making a disclosure to the government, acting proactively in that way. Foley can always certainly help with those. Over to Erin.
Thank you, Anna.